Wow, everything you need.
Yeah. Whoa. That's a crazy view.
What you're seeing is a $100 billion city in Malaysia. At one point, this city was close to hosting 1 million people, all while being a shining example of green and modern living. This place has almost no taxes and offers every living necessity within its boundaries. Who wouldn't want to live here? Yet 8 years later, the place is still empty. Recent estimates show that only 1% of the city is occupied with less than 10,000 people. Most visitors come on weekends to enjoy duty-free alcohol, but are careful to leave before night. The city's only shopping mall has a few open shops, its white, pristine beaches are deserted, and its 35-story towers are empty. There's a miniature model showing how the finished version of the city would look, and to be fair, it is quite impressive. Now, this model stands as a sad reminder of the city's reality. So what exactly went wrong with Forest City? Why is everyone reluctant to live here? And are there still hopes of reviving it? The explanation is a bit complex, but we will try our best to summarize it. To understand Forest City's downfall, we have to follow two stories. One of China's real estate market and second of Country Garden, the company behind Forest City. If you were a middle-class Chinese living during the early 2000s, you wouldn't have a lot of investment opportunities. You can't put your money in a bank because the interest rates are too low and your savings would get devalued. The stock market was seen as risky and bonds in China lacked transparency. So your only option would be to invest in real estate projects. The obvious problem is that most citizens find property out of reach. But that all changed when Prime Minister Wen Jiabao announced affordable housing reforms. Banks started to offer easy mortgages and taxes on buying property were relaxed. Around 170 million square meters of new housing was built annually. More and more private developers like China's Country Garden seized on this opportunity. They started borrowing huge sums of loans to build local and offshore projects. One such project was Forest City. Forest City was located in the state of Johor in the southern part of the country. This puts the project face-to-face with Singapore, as the Johor Strait acts as a natural boundary between the two. The city was marketed as a dream paradise for all mankind. But in reality, it was aimed squarely at middle-class Chinese, offering them a chance to own a second home abroad. Its selling prices were out of reach for most ordinary Malaysians. Most buyers weren't looking for permanent residence, but an investment that could be a holiday home or accommodation for children headed to study in Singapore. According to foreign policy publication, some buyers were even offered to buy a flat in China and get one free in Forest City. The developers of Forest City also wanted to take advantage of Singapore's proximity. After all, a rich country like Singapore would have several prospective buyers. Being an island, Singapore has a lack of space for its growing population and industries. That's why its housing demand has skyrocketed in the past decade. Forest City would solve this problem by creating relatively cheaper options in its vicinity. So in theory, people would live in Forest City and go to Singapore for work. It might sound unrealistic, but it isn't. Crossing into Singapore only requires 30 minutes using the second link bridge between Johor and Singapore. The project was launched in 2016 by Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, Sultan of Johor Ibrahim Iskandar, and CEO of Country Garden. In this very event, Forest City was granted a duty-free status along with other incentives for investors and tourists. For example, corporate tax rates range from 0 to 5%, and income tax was a flat 15%. Multiple entry visa was introduced so that people visiting Forest City wouldn't have to renew their visas each time. Being a coastline development, Forest City was already a prime spot. The aim was to create an exclusive community just across the Johor Strait. That's why even a small two-bedroom apartment would cost $170,000 back in 2017. Inside the city, there are two luxury hotels, the Marina Hotel and the Golf Hotel. Each hotel has around 300 rooms with world-class facilities on display. There is also an international school, parks, golf courses, and a dozen apartment buildings. The developers envisioned the city as a peaceful recluse, far from the chaos of mainland Malaysia. Here, parents could raise their kids in a safe and healthy environment, and retired professionals could breathe a sigh of relief. The city was supposed to be a far cry from busy cities like London or New York. Instead, it would be a modern green village. That's why much of the city's footprint is dominated by landscaping and green areas. Even the residential buildings are covered with dozens of plants poking out from the balconies. According to the city's website, every day people will live in gardens, breathe in forests, and enjoy nature. Aside from a marketing standpoint, this vegetation would help combat Malaysia's hot and humid climate. All these aspects were strategically planned by Country Garden and its Malaysian business partner EDSB. 60% of Forest City was owned by Country Garden, while EDSB owned the remaining 40%. Both companies wanted to put real money behind the project, and they did. They put $100 billion. So the financing was solved, the marketing was complete, and they also knew their target customer. The only thing left to sort out was the space. The plan was to create a city half the size of Manhattan in New York. Fitting a city of this size wasn't really possible in the state of Johor itself. Dubai solved its space issue by creating a series of islands known as the man-made island of Dubai. So the developers of Forest City copied what they saw. Forest City's construction began in 2014 with extensive land reclamation. In simple words, they dumped thousands of tons of sand and rock to create an artificial island. However, there were a few problems that both Malaysia and China overlooked. To be more clear, what they were doing was illegal. The region where Forest City lies is considered an environmentally sensitive area. This place is home to an extensive bed of seagrass, the largest in Malaysia, and a nearby mangrove forest. Both these regions are protected under the Ramsar Convention. No development is allowed here except for low-impact nature tourism, research, or education. To complicate matters, no environmental impact assessment was done prior to initiating construction. You will learn the reason later on. Malaysia had also not informed Singapore as required under the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. A construction of this scale would directly affect the water currents and the fishing industry in Singapore. Due to strong opposition from both environmental groups in Singapore, Country Garden announced that it was downsizing the project by 30%. To reduce its impact on marine life, Forest City was now divided into 4 islands. Country Garden also had to pay $25 million in compensation to 250 fishermen affected by land reclamation. If you liked the video so far, kindly take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We bring the latest news in the construction industry with 2 new videos each week. Enough with promotions, let's return to Forest City. Do you remember the Sultan of Johor we mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that he had a 34% stake in Forest City. The Sultan, being a man of immense wealth and connections, influenced the Johor Department of Environment to approve the project. This hasty approval was disastrous for Forest City, as the media began speculating about the project. Despite the setback, Forest City was an initial success. Its pre-sales were launched in December 2015, and 2 years later, 16,000 units were sold. However, the number of people who actually moved to the city was quite low. By 2019, only 500 people lived there, according to some reports. The media quickly started referring to it as a ghost town. In 2022, Business Insider sent one of their reporters to explore the abandoned city. Not surprisingly, the area was devoid of any human activity. Every shop in the area was closed or turned into a storeroom. One staff member told the reporter that the shops have been closed or vacated for over 2 years. Only 3 restaurants were open in the whole city, with only a handful of people. The Marina Hotel in Forest City was locked, and its swimming pool was discolored. The only operational resort was Forest City's Golf Hotel. Unlike the rest of Forest City, it was bustling with people, mostly golf enthusiasts. The beach was also empty, except for discarded beer bottles. Being a duty-free zone, most visitors came to Forest City to stock up on alcohol. The city's duty-free status makes alcohol and cigarettes very cheap. The rest of Malaysia has the 3rd highest alcohol tax in the world, just behind Norway and Singapore. The city's only shopping mall was huge, but like the rest of the city, it was empty. With the exception of one cafe, there was barely any business. Cigarette butts were discarded on the escalators and on the floor. Many travel vloggers also visited Forest City to see whether it was truly a ghost town.
I've read a lot online. I don't know how much of it I believe.
This man named Ben Morris visited the city to have an insider's view. To his dismay, much of the news reports were true. The place was indeed empty. This is what his first impression was.
It looks so overgrown. Kind of looks like a zombie apocalypse has happened here.
This many buildings could undoubtedly be home to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, but I've only seen a handful so far.
Despite being abandoned, much of Forest City is well maintained. The roads are clean, gardeners could be seen trimming plants, and there's also ample amounts of security. It seems like a project with a lot of potential. But why did the buyers not respond? It's a complex mix of reasons. Some suggest that the project's dependence on Chinese buyers doomed it. When China's property market crashed in 2021, it had a severe impact on Forest City's sales. Major developers like Country Garden were left bankrupt as they couldn't pay back the enormous loans they took. China also implemented capital controls to deal with this crisis. Citizens were restricted from spending more than $50,000 abroad annually. The minimum price of a Forest City apartment sits at around $75,000 and can be as much as $3.5 million. The COVID pandemic sucked out the remaining life from the project. Travel restrictions discouraged homeowners from moving to Forest City. Many of them had to sell their apartments at a fraction of their original cost. As a result, only 15% of Forest City is developed, with 9,000 people currently living in it. Country Garden is now stuck in a dilemma. Wrapping up the project is too expensive, and so is taking it ahead. The once property giant now owes around $200 billion in debt. However, Malaysia hasn't given up on Forest City yet. Just recently, the city was declared a special financial zone. Starting from the first quarter of 2025, the government would offer tax breaks to both businesses and working individuals. Malaysia's new Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, has also taken a proactive stance toward the city's revival. Recently, Housing and Local Committee Chairman Yafni Shukor claimed that 70% of property inside the city has been sold. He promises that this trend will continue for the next 3 to 4 years. While there are no independent reports to verify his claim, it's possible that Forest City could become a success in the future. Do you think it could be revived? Comment below. We also made a video about Neom, which is Saudi Arabia's $1.5 trillion city. Much like Forest City, it's proving to be a big trouble for its developers. You can watch it here if you're interested. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll catch up in the next video.